The lake that refuses to freeze at -71. Yakutia, the coldest inhabited place on the surface of this planet. In winter, temperatures fall to -71 degrees Celsius. Trees explode from the inside. Mercury freezes solid in the thermometer. Steel snaps like glass. Every body of water within 1,000 kilometers is locked under 2 meters of ice for 9 months of the year. Everyone, except one. A single black lake, 3 by 4 kilometers across, sitting in the middle of the deadest cold on Earth, and refusing to freeze. The Evens, the indigenous people of this region, have a name for what lives in it. They have used that name for at least 300 years. They call it Churti, the devil. The lake is called Labynkyr. It sits in the Sakha Republic of far eastern Russia, 60 kilometers due south of a settlement called Oymyakon. Oymyakon holds the record for the coldest temperature ever measured in a place where human beings live. 500 people live there. The school closes when the air drops below -55. Cars idle through the night because if you shut the engine off, the fuel lines crack. This is the climate. 60 kilometers south of that, in open taiga, sits the lake. 14 kilometers long, 4 wide, 52 meters at average depth, and at one point on the floor, a fissure that drops to 80. Around it, 800,000 other lakes across the Sakha Republic. Every one of them freezes solid every winter. Children skate on them. Hunters drive trucks across them. Reindeer cross them in herds. Labynkyr does not. Not in October, not in February, not at -68 with the air clear and still. The surface stays liquid, black, reflective. In a region where nothing else remains liquid, this one body of water does. That part is not in dispute. The Russian Academy of Sciences confirms it. 3 separate Soviet survey teams confirmed it across the second half of the 20th century. The Avens have always known. When you ask them why, they do not answer the question. They tell you instead what is in it. The Evens are reindeer herders, hunters. Their oral history of this country predates the Russian arrival by at least 4 centuries. The thing they describe is consistent across every account given to ethnographers in the 19th and early 20th century. Dark gray, larger than a boat, a jaw that closes in a single motion, a long neck, a head that in some tellings resembles the beak of a bird. It surfaces in summer. It moves beneath the boats of fishermen and lifts them briefly out of the water. And when it calls, the herders say, it sounds like a child crying. It takes dogs first, then reindeer, then, very rarely, a person. In 1920, a Russian explorer named Gennady Borodulin traveled this region collecting cold pole folklore. His book, A Trip to the Cold Pole, contains one passage that has been quoted with reluctance in every serious account written since. Borodulin recorded the testimony of an Even hunter whose family was camping on the lakeshore one summer. The hunter's son, a boy of perhaps 7, was at the water's edge. Borodulin writes, and I am quoting now, that the family saw the child being carried away by an unknown animal to the center of the lake. It was a dark creature with a mouth like a bird's beak. It held the child and moved away with quick rushes, and then it dived, leaving huge waves, and dragged the child under the water. Borodulin writes that the boy's grandfather later returned to the lake with traps and bait and killed the creature. He does not describe what it was. He does not describe what they did with it. The passage ends. The book closes. In June of 1953, a small geological expedition from the Soviet Academy of Sciences arrived in the Oymyakon region to survey for tin and gold. The expedition leader was Viktor Tverdoklebov, 32 years old, a specialist in cold region geology. He had survived the war. He had no patience for folklore. His expedition logs from this trip are housed today in the archives of the Yakutsk Scientific Center, and they are, almost in their entirety, dry and technical and unremarkable, except for one page, dated the 27th of July. On that day, the expedition is not at Labynkyr. They are at the neighboring lake, 20 kilometers to the north, a smaller body of water called Vorota, which, according to local accounts, is connected to Labynkyr by an underground channel. Tverdoklebov and his assistant, a geologist named Boris Beshkatov, are eating lunch on a low cliff above the lake at around 2 in the afternoon. The weather is clear. Both men notice, simultaneously, a disturbance on the water a few hundred meters out. The disturbance resolves into a shape. Tverdoklebov writes in his log that the animal was swimming in such a way that there was no doubt of its great size. He could see its back protruding from the water by about a meter, and the wake it left was massive. The general impression, he writes, was of a fish-like creature, very large, dark gray, length 15 meters at minimum. The head he could not see clearly, but it appeared blunt and broad. He had never seen, he writes, any aquatic animal of this size, neither in pictures nor in reality. He signed the entry. He never spoke of it publicly again. Bashkatov backed up the account in a single interview in 1961, and then he too stopped.
For half a century, the case sat in the archives. Soviet science did not officially investigate folkloric creatures. Tverdoklebov's career continued. He died in 2010, a respected geologist with 80 technical publications and 1 anomalous lunch. Then, in 2006, 3 Russian sport fishermen with a commercial fish-finding sonar dropped a transducer over the side of a small boat on Labynkyr. The screen recorded a single moving object beneath them. The object measured 6.5 meters in length at 20 meters depth. It did not match the profile of any fish species recorded in the lake. The recording was preserved. The fishermen filed it. Nothing came of it. They were not scientists. 6 years later, in 2012, Lyudmila Yemelyanova, associate professor of biogeography at Moscow State University, 30 years of cold region fieldwork to her name, led a fully equipped scientific expedition to Labynkyr with marine-grade echo-sounding equipment. The mission was officially to study the lake's biology. It lasted 7 days. Her interview with the Siberian Times, given immediately afterward, contains a single line that the world has not been able to shake. She said, and I am quoting now, that they registered with their echo-sounding device several seriously big underwater objects, bigger than a fish, bigger than even a group of fish. She declined to speculate further. The raw sonar data was scheduled to be published in a peer-reviewed paper later that year. It was not. When she was asked in 2014 why the data had been withdrawn, she said only that the readings required further interpretation. 13 years on, no further interpretation has been published. The lake is in a region you cannot enter without a Russian federal permit. The Sakha Republic does not issue them quickly. Now stop for a moment. Take a slow breath and look at what is actually on the table, with no speculation. You have a lake that does not freeze in a climate where steel snaps like glass. The accepted scientific explanation is a geothermal vent on the lake floor. Volcanic warming. Plausible. Partially supported by core samples. Fine. You have 400 years of indigenous testimony from a people whose ethnographic record are every other detail in this region. The bears, the reindeer migrations, the fish populations has been confirmed by Russian science. They are not known to invent. You have 1 Soviet geologist's signed expedition log. You have a 2006 sonar trace, and you have a 2012 sonar dataset that was withdrawn from publication. Which of these pieces of evidence do you discount, and on what basis? Tell me in the comments. I am genuinely asking. There is one more thing this video does not have time for. The lake Tverdoklebov was actually at when he saw what he saw was not Labynkyr. It was the neighboring lake, Lake Vorota. And what surfaced there in 1953, and what surfaced there again in front of 3 Soviet petroleum engineers in 1989, is a different story, with a different shape and a problem that may not have an answer at all. That file is right here.